Now, I've got the perfect guest in the studio to help us get our heads around what's going on with the British economy. Interest rates now at a 15-year high. Roger Bootle, the Senior Independent Advisor to Capital Economics, joins me now, a leading economist, an expert on all these matters, Roger. First of all, you might have seen my interview earlier with Kwasi Kwarteng. What's your reaction to what he's saying there? He's talking about bringing government spending down, corporation tax cut, stimulating growth in a different way. Do you agree with that analysis?
Yes, I do, actually. It's a shame that he's come to that realisation now, as it were, and we had that botched experiment before.
Yes.
But I think he's largely right.
And what should Jeremy Hunt do in the autumn statement, do you think?
Well, I think he's boxed in, really, by what he's done before and by what he's said before. He's not going to cut corporation tax, is he? And I don't suppose he's going to cut government spending. But
he should. I mean, he's not going to because it looks politically weak. But as far as businesses are concerned, I mean, what are you hearing from businesses? Because in a journalistic capacity, I'm hearing businesses tearing their hair out, thinking it's more difficult than ever to start a business, let alone to keep it afloat. There's been lots of handouts for individuals when it comes to help with energy bills. We got the Federation of Small Businesses, I think, last month saying that 100,000 businesses face going under this winter because of their own energy bills. Has the Tory government, the so-called government of business, been found wanting when it comes to helping businesses?
Yes, is I think the answer.
Yeah.
But, you know, the big issue is the macroeconomy, and you don't solve those problems by, frankly, dishing out handouts, although we have been doing that over the last few years in various ways. I suspect he's going to have to do very little, actually, in this autumn statement. It's a case of just trying to keep the ship afloat, keeping it steady, and hoping that things pan out OK. Now, I'm actually reasonably pessimistic, unfortunately, about the outlook for interest rates and inflation.
Right.
I think it'll take a lot longer for that to come right. But they've got to hope that that is going to come right. Where I very much agreed with Kwasi was on public spending. You know, you can't square this circle unless you get to grips with public spending. And the obvious one to do something about is HS2.
Scrap it?
Yes.
Even though we've already spent billions on it?
There's a well-known rule in economics: you must let bygones be bygones. All rational decisions are forward-looking. Forget what you've spent.
Right.
Look at what the position is now, going forward. What are the advantages? And I think they're pretty slender, and the costs are still rising.
That's the first loss is your best loss theory. When it comes to government spending in general, though, and also in terms of household debt, I was intrigued to read a piece that you wrote recently for The Telegraph. We headlined it, "Forget sky-high debt, the real economic danger is a lack of growth." But that's not to say that you're not worried about sky-high debt, are you, Roger?
You're absolutely right, because as you all know, being a columnist yourself, one of the problems is you've got no control over the headlines.
I know. Well, we do tend to put quite sensational headlines on things so people click on the story. But to explain that to me, though, sky-high debt is a problem, but it's not as big a problem as the lack of growth in this country. Is that the premise?
Yes. Well, there are a couple of strands to this. The first is that people keep talking about the national debt. It's not really the national debt at all. It's the public debt. It's the debt of the government, the state, to everyone else. Most of those everyone else are, in fact, other British people or pension funds, insurance companies or whatever. So that's the first thing.
Yes.
People think this is, you know, vast debt owed by the country. It's not. And the second thing is, we've been here before. After the Napoleonic Wars, which I don't myself remember, the debt was something like 260% of GDP, as opposed to around about 100 we're at now. And also after the Second World War, it was around about that. So we've been there before, we worked it down. Working it down means maintaining confidence, keeping down government spending, keeping the deficit down so the debt doesn't keep building up. But the most important thing is having the economy growing. And as the economy grows, that enables you to put up with what is too high a level of debt.
But then I remember Ronald Reagan famously quoted as saying the deficit is big enough to look after itself. And yet at the same time, Reaganomics is associated with a period of high growth in the US. So how do you square that circle? Because he wasn't worried about the deficit.
Well, no, and in the end, of course, America didn't actually get out of its financial problems. I mean, that worked for a time, that policy. And Truss, of course, was following exactly that rubric. I think there are big limits to this, and particularly for an economy like the UK, which is much more vulnerable than the US. You can't just say, to hell with the deficit, we're going to cut taxes anyway. I think the objective of cutting taxes is absolutely right. But to do that in a sustainable way in this economy, you've got to tackle government spending. And that was the big mistake, I think, under Truss.
And what about productivity? Because I think a key concern from people watching and listening to this is that we just aren't as productive as we used to be. Also, this move towards work from home perhaps has adversely affected productivity. I don't know what your take is on that, Roger.
Yes, I think it probably has. This is a problem, of course, we've had for a long time. It's got worse for a variety of reasons. Regulation is one.
We're over-regulated.
We're over-regulated and regulated in the wrong way. The public sector is, I think, by and large, a baleful influence across the whole economy, and its own productivity is pretty poor.
Because the public sector is too large?
It is too large, absolutely. Interferes too much and is, my own experience confirms, is deeply inefficient.
Yes.
But on working from home, it's, of course, been a great benefit for a number of people, but I don't think it's been great for productivity, no.
And when Kwasi talked about, you think he's more optimistic than you're going to be, about this debt mountain, particularly people's mortgage debt catching up with them. Are you worried about a time bomb waiting to explode? Because you also wrote a piece for us where you said, again, it might not be your headline, but this was the thrust of the article, Britain's property wealth boom is an illusion and the national fixation with the housing ladder ignores fundamental flaws in the market. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant was this is really a dichotomy between wealth as it appears to individuals and their families and, as it were, wealth for the country as a whole. If you don't do anything to your property, you just sit there and live in it, and the price goes up 3 or 4 times, which is what is the experience of millions of ordinary people in this country, you feel richer. And indeed, in some senses, you are richer. In some senses, when you, at the end of your life, you move down or whatever, or sell the house or leave it to your children, then that's wealth that you can use. But if you ask yourself the question, what has that done to the real wealth of the country, the fact that your wealth has gone up 3 or 4 times the paper wealth of in the house? And the answer is, it's done nothing at all. 39 Acacia Avenue, Croydon, is still doing exactly what it did before. That's to say, it sits there and it provides housing services. So there's an illusion. And people think that constantly rising house prices are, in some sense or other, making the country better off. They're not.
All right. What do you think is going to happen to interest rates over the course of the next year to 18 months? Stay level or come down?
The honest answer is I don't know, but my fear is they're going to have to go up some more. I've on record as saying I think the peak will be something like about 6%.
Right.
I don't know. It depends, of course, on what happens to inflation. But I think inflation is going to be quite obstinate. And the bank will have to, I think, get tougher. Do you think the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey's been doing a good job? What's your analysis of his performance in office so far, Roger? Well, look, it's a very tough job. It's a very tough job indeed. You're caveating your answer. No, it's a very tough job. He hasn't excelled, but it's not just him. It's the other members of the committee. Excelled? It's the other members of the committee.
Right.
It's not just him, don't forget. He's just one voice on the committee. He has one vote. You know, point to the others on the committee who've been...
But what's the problem with the committee? They're too left-leaning, they're too kind of prone to Treasury orthodoxy, that they are managing decline rather than stimulating growth. Just characterise what's wrong with this committee.
Well, their big mistake was not to spot inflation rising on the horizon when some other people outside could. And that's, I think, nothing whatever to do with left-wing politics. It's to do with their take on economics, if you like, and the way they observe the economy, and the Bank of England model was next to useless. So I think there's been something wrong with the quality and behaviour and nature of the people on the committee, and in particular, it was too much in one vein of one intellectual approach. We need some mavericks on that committee. Good point upon which to end. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Roger Bootle.